So how much time would you say that we have left? Honestly, it's a question that I've been rolling around in the back of my head lately, and I'll be honest with you, it's something that I find very difficult to grapple with based on some of the conclusions that I've come to. And it's a common comment that I see being left on my videos, and I think it deserves a discussion for sure. So let's chat about it. If you're new to this channel, my name is Chris, and on this channel we discuss emergency preparedness, aka prepping. Now, before I jump into discussing the question that I posed at the beginning of the video, I want to talk about a recent email that I received from a subscriber, and it ties in to this whole question that we're trying to answer regarding how much time we have left. He said this: since you have a YouTube channel in which you have a financial and emotional investment in gloom and doom, how do you avoid seeing everything through this lens? What's being asked here is regarding confirmation bias, especially for someone like myself that makes a living from discussing this very specific issue here on this platform. And it's something that from time to time, I try to pull back and think about, and I would encourage you at least to do the same. But back to his question regarding confirmation bias, and I promise I'm gonna try to answer the main question I posed at the beginning regarding how much time we have left, but I think we need to first think about this issue of confirmation bias for a moment. So look, first, prepping comes at a cost, but how much you spend is really up to you. I don't only read his financial, the word financial he used in the email is personal to mean the business and infrastructure that produces all this prepping content here on this channel, but also him suggesting the cost of what we all spend on our prepping endeavors. We invest our time and energy into this. So, you know, because we're doing that, are we getting confirmation bias? And again, that's a lot of time and money, but some people, they prep because that's what they've always done. They've set aside abundance for later times of scarcity, and there's nothing wrong with that. But there's also the investment beyond just the physical, our brain power, our mental energy. And look, it can take a heavy toll on our mental stability and our peace of mind to be focused so often, so heavily on doom and gloom. And I do realize this. And again, it's something, just being honest here, that I have to grapple with in my life from time to time and try to reevaluate and make sure I'm not going off on a tangent down the wrong path. Now, obviously, again, with this channel, the website that I have, and everything that I do in my desire to try to educate and raise awareness on this issue in our community, look, I spend a lot of time with my team researching, writing, videoing about the worst case scenarios, because I think if we tease out these issues and we look at where they could go, I think it's always a good idea to at least take your skills and your abilities and your preps to that point so you understand how far can you go with what you've done. And as we do that, we also try to separate really the wheat from the chaff, as they say. We try to dismiss the more outlandish possibilities, and we try to pull back and instead focus on the more realistic probabilities. We here on the channel, we mainly have that approach because we want to avoid, and I'm tying this all together, we try to avoid confirmation bias. And that's defined, confirmation bias is defined as the tendency to interpret new evidence as confirmation of one's existing beliefs or theories. It's only seeking out information that confirms our beliefs and ignoring or discrediting information that doesn't really support your own beliefs. It's looking for evidence that confirms what you already think is true rather than considering all the evidence available. In other words, we begin to cherry pick the data that we want to, again, affirm the beliefs that we already hold. And trying to avoid confirmation bias is how I avoid seeing everything through this lens of doom and gloom as a subscriber question. So, am I the victim of confirmation bias by only seeking out bad news? And I think many channels drive cortisone and dopamine dumps with sensational predictions of the end of it all in the next 24 hours. We're all gonna be dead here in the next few days, week, whatever. And that's not the type of extreme viewpoint that I hold at this channel. And look, I'm not gonna go into a long elaboration about all my concerns, as I think I've dropped different components of my concerns throughout videos that I've done over the last several years. I've never really hidden anything. But I realize that preparedness is a big tent. So I try not to focus on my concerns, but I try to address the concerns that we hold in this community to make sure that we're educated and informed. And most importantly, we have a plan on how to address those issues. But like you, I'm very concerned about the issues that are playing out right now in this world. And again, here on the team, we spend a lot of time researching and trying to share information to separate realistic probabilities from the things that are possible but not probable. And I try to look at the actual data from multiple sources. And again, I hate using the word me or I or we so often, but I'm just sharing, again, my personal take on how I address this issue of confirmation bias and how I try to work through it. And again, I'm just sharing the journey that I go through, so hopefully maybe you can use a framework I'm using. What I do is I try to look for confirmation from multiple sources with any of the facts that I present, and I try to put an honest analysis of how things might extrapolate out from there without injecting my own personal biases. And again, if you've watched this channel for any length of time, even the decision I make to not introduce my own take on politics, because I think in this country, we've gotten so used to not listening to news, we listen to opinion. And most people don't understand the difference between the two because we've been so bombarded with people's opinions on different issues, specifically in the political arena. Now, look, getting back to the main thing here, one of the comments that I appreciate most on my weekly news segment that I do at the beginning of every week is the fact that on this channel, we don't sensationalize what's happening around the world. And admittedly, it makes me seem a little bit boring because I'm not going to hype up issues that are going to become really nothing burgers in the end. But I will tell you, hey, here's a concern, here's a threat that you need to be aware of because it may or may not impact it how you prepare. And as we always say here, if I'm genuinely worried about something, I'll let you know. But here's a reality I'm very aware of. Doing that analysis and deep dives into potential future disasters can, at times, lead me down a dark and gloomy path. And I think you probably can relate. You've probably seen enough of the concerns out there that it's easy to allow yourself to go to that place. And it's challenging to keep at bay the feelings of anxiety that there's not enough time or that we're spinning uncontrollably to our collective doom. And here's just, again, transparency. This is something that I went through a few days ago where, based on some things I was researching, and again, I don't dump everything I research on this channel, the data just was overwhelming, I'll put it that way. And I really had to catch myself to pull back, okay, to realize, yes, this is happening, but how will I react? Will I get caught up in the fear, the anxiety, and allow myself to spin off in that? And again, as I said a second ago, I'm just sharing my own thought process to hopefully help you work through these issues as you go through them yourself. Look, and I'll be honest with you, I would love for many of my conclusions to be wrong, and I mean this from the bottom of my heart. I would love for all my views and predictions to be incorrect. Sometimes it feels to be a bit overwhelming, and it's nice every now and then to try to check out. I have to do that, and I would encourage you to do the same. Make sure that you're guarding your mental, really making sure that you're guarding your emotional, I'm totally blanking on the word here. It's a common phrase that I've used in the past, but just make sure that you're protecting yourself mentally is, I guess, what I'm trying to say, to not your mental well-being. And for me, I typically try to set aside a day each week to try and let my mind disconnect for a moment. And usually what I like to do is I ride one wheels with my son, and I'll go out of town, usually to San Diego once a week. And the weather's just amazing down there. It's beautiful. I go out, I have some other friends, we'll ride, we'll grab a beer, and it's nice because if the news, the forecast, and everyday events aren't concerning you at some level, you might not be aware of what's happening in the world. And I'm all too aware having to do this on this channel and present information. And at times it can feel to be a bit of a burden. And I understand what I'd like to believe I understand what you're probably going through and the concerns you have. And again, I don't say this to scare you, but yeah, the more I dig in, the more I am concerned. I'll put it that way. And again, when I'm feeling overwhelmed, I remind myself of two quotes. One I find humorous, and the other is simple but profound. It was the writer Anton Chekhov who wrote, "Any idiot can face a crisis. It's this day-to-day living that wears you out." And what I take from that is the meaning of a lot of things. But basically, we can rise to the challenges of the big crisis we face if we prepare. But the day-to-day hassle of one small piece of bad news after another can sometimes defeat us if we let it. Now, the second quote was from the Stoic philosopher Epictetus, who wrote, "Suffering arises from trying to control what is uncontrollable, or from neglecting what is within our power. The overwhelming feeling of doom and gloom we sometimes feel is rooted in our feeling that we cannot alter or influence the path that we're on, perhaps speeding towards a cliff or a collapse that's in front of us. But still, it also comes from our neglect of what we can do in the present moment and how focusing on what we can do in the present moment will improve our present life. It's a practical solution to an uncertain future. I recently read an article entitled "The Profound Loneliness of Being Collapse Aware," where the author terms this awareness of the downhill nature in our future as collapse aware. I've had people recently in the comments of some of my videos use that term, and I don't know who coined it, but I think it's in a very appropriate phrase of what we're discussing here. And I'll link to the article below if you want to read it. I will warn you up front, it's pretty heavy. If you already feel like you have enough on your plate, I wouldn't recommend you read it. But it goes through the discussion of what a person experiences when they become aware of just, where things are heading. I'll put it that way. Now, spoiler, or just, fair warning, he does come from the position of anthropogenic climate change, something I've talked about on the channel. I know some people have differing views on this, but he does slate it from that angle. Maybe you could read the article and maybe you have a different concern and you still see it from that perspective. But I think we all collectively in this community are sharing the same sense of unease and an understanding of what's coming down the road. It's when a person is topped up and overflowing with the awareness of so many problems that we face, they come to accept that modern civilization is unsustainable, will eventually collapse into chaos. And that's really the main focus of this article. And again, grappling with it, not really being able to talk to anybody. And essentially the author shares his story of becoming collapse aware and trying to communicate this, and others not really wanting to hear that. And he shares why he believes humanity is not going to make it past the next 20 or 30 years or so. And I've read so many different articles, and I know it's easy to sit back and say, well, everybody keeps, and every generation keeps writing the doom and gloom. But I think it's interesting because he writes, there are some collapse-aware people who think our civilization has several decades left. And there are some who think that it's going to all come crashing down the next year or two. And that sounds like the comment section of most of my videos. There's a huge gap and everything in between. And I would take that a step further and say this. Additionally, there are some people who are oblivious to how bad things are getting, and some are actively stoking the fires and cheering for a collapse. So you've got those two sides of the extreme as well, and I've seen both sides of that. And look, I tend to agree with this position that we may only have 2 or 3 decades left at best, and I have a more optimistic I have optimistic friends who believe that life will find a way. I do try to, again, getting back to the discussion of confirmation bias, I don't always just try to encircle myself with people that believe and we're all dead, but I try to find people to get balance, is what I'm trying to say. And I find it to be very helpful. But if we were to just take a short list and look at the things that are happening in the world, we've got multiple nations actively engaged in world war that could have a nuclear component to it at any time. We have countries that are actively hoarding food resources at the same time that we're witnessing more simultaneous regions suffering from crop failure. We're using up the planet's resources at an alarming rate. The ocean temperatures are higher than they've ever been since we started recording them for a consistent period of time. And everyday temperature records are being smashed at an abnormally high rate. Our nation, which was once a beacon, a light on the hill for what a democracy could look like, what being united could look like, is now in shambles, being divided from things like school boards to homeowner associations, all the way up to politicians. And we're not just divided as well. Some people are demonizing and dehumanizing others using certain language to speak of the opposition, and which, if you look historically, is a very, very dangerous sign of a future in which, well, you can piece it together, how that type of language eventually plays out in a culture and a society. But the real truth is wildly different from what we're being told about our economy and our just daily getting by. We're being told that the economy is robust, while over the last 20 years, the cost of essentials, a subscriber recently sent me a graph that was a bit of an eye-opener, that, you look at the essentials, things like shelter, food, health insurance, all these things that we all need have increased, several hundred times based off, cost of living. But then the pacifiers like toys, TVs, and phones they've all decreased in price. I'm not going to say that as a conspiracy theory, but it's interesting that things that keep us calm, they're getting cheaper, but the things we need only get more expensive. And I know, look, that's a bit of a tirade of frustration, and you might view me as a pessimist. And if you've, again, followed me for any length of time on this channel, you know I'm much more pragmatic than that. The point I'm trying to make is this. I can go on and on about all the signs of deep problems around us, but deep down, I would love to believe someone will fix this. I really do. It would be nice to assume AI, that politicians are going to get it together and they're going to find a solution. But I'm sure we'd all like to think that way. And I'd love to believe that those that we've entrusted with our votes are going to rise to the moment and enact changes that will put us on the right path to recover from some of these issues. And I'd even be okay with hoping, again, that AI could come up with solutions that could move humanity beyond its own intrinsic selfishness. But again, all these things I can examine as potential future threats. That's all I can do, is I can look at this and I can understand the impact that they will have on our lives and are already having. But I don't have to let them rule my present moment, and neither do you. Let me say that again. Despite all the things that we see, you do not have to let them rule your present moment. You don't have to let them define your life. Look, I've been prepping for quite a long time. I would say maybe, to a degree, since I was young, growing up in Boy Scouts, learning survivalism. That's kind of always been part of who I am, my DNA. I came to being a serious prepper several years back and started learning everything I could. Sometimes I had to find new ways to make things work best for me. In some cases, I've had to rediscover old ways that died off with my ancestors. The reason I have this channel is to try to take people on my journey of learning to prepare. And believe me when I say this, I wish I were wrong. I'd love to do this channel, or rather I'd love to do other channels about my hobbies, things that bring me joy. And I'm not saying being prepared and doing these things don't bring me joy, but I'd love to take on a much lighter and much more funner subject, is I guess what I'm trying to say. And as I mentioned a moment ago, I have a weekly hobby that I use for an escape. But after I move past the distractions, I have to come back to reality. And believe me when I say I need the distractions periodically. So, do I have confirmation bias? I ask myself that question a lot. I'd like to believe that I don't. But I realize, if I'm being completely honest, that I do struggle to see a silver lining in any of the things that are playing out in the world. What do you think? Is this a question you grappled with, and what conclusions have you come to, even when you sit down and even look at your own life in regards to confirmation bias? So let me try to wrap this video up and answer the central question that I posed at the beginning in the video title. How much time do we have left? Honestly, I don't know. I'd like to believe we have more time, but the timeline for things that were once considered possibility decades in the future are beginning to move up more and more rapidly. I'd like to say I know, but I truly do not. And I think anybody that's trying to tell you they do know is usually trying to sell you something. All I know is that the evidence points to the fact that we need to prepare. It's in our best interest to get ready with the time that we have. Again, I'm not trying to sell you anything. I'm just sharing my own personal thought process here and where I see things going. And if you have a different conclusion, again, I'd love to hear more positivity. I'll tell you that much. I always welcome it. Look, I'm only sharing my own thoughts and how I'm trying to process all this. And here's the confession. I'd say, sorry, it's hot in here. I gotta turn the AC on after I do this. I'd say about 2 years ago, maybe as far as 18 months ago, when people would comment on the videos that we don't have much time left. I've read these comments over and over for years. I would typically blow them off like, oh, okay, I think you're going a little too far. You're going a little too hard in the paint there. The optimist in me would discount such notions, and for a lot of reasons. But surely we have more time, I would think to myself. Look, we're going to prepare. We've got more time. Don't listen to that. But hey, I've got young children, and for me, allowing such thoughts, it can be overwhelming. I want the absolute best future for them, as any parent would. However, the implied part of this question hangs in the word left. How much time do we have left? I think that the end point of how much is left depends a lot on you and what you do now in the present moment. The same subscriber I mentioned earlier in this video that wrote me about confirmation bias after a few back and forth emails, he finished in his last email by saying this: I know too many people that live in a constant state of fear or depression because they obsess about the dangers. But one must prepare to live, not focus on possible destruction. Look, I'm not going to, again, share any of the subscriber's details. He did say that it's fine if I share what I just did. But let me say thank you, because I think you provided some really solid insight. I think you said it very well. I believe I've chosen to live. I've decided to learn as much as I can, and I continue to do so. I have chosen to do everything possible to ensure that my kids have the best possible future. I have chosen to prepare. Have you? That's all we can do at this point. Succumbing to fear means I've lost, and as long as I have a breath left in my lungs, I refuse to give up. If there were one thing I wish to impart beyond just the threat assessments that we do on this channel, the best practices of preparing, which we try to roll out on a regular basis, and the practical hands-on videos that we release on this channel, it would be that one of the significant factors of the time you have left is how you approach the present. You won't have much left if you spend your days wringing your hands and over-anxiously worrying about the future. If you prepare, incorporate those preps into your daily life, become more self-sufficient every day, no matter how small it may be, and learn vital do-it-yourself skills to lessen your dependence on filling big supply chains that we've all become accustomed to, a big factor of what's left to you will be up to you. When the moment arises for you to apply these skills, you'll be glad you just didn't sit around consuming fear porn, but instead you took practical steps to make yourself ready. Look, here's a reality. None of us will survive some extinction level asteroid strike or something equivalent. So I don't worry about prepping for those events. Unless I have some deep underground bunker, it's probably not going to happen. But with the slow polycrisis of economic collapse, civil unrest, crop failures due to weather extremes, and even world wars, people can and they do survive those. The reason they survive is because they have what they need to endure. They busied their present moments by setting a clear path through the chaos of their future. It's more likely the time we have left is not in the hands of any world leaders or anyone else for that matter. The time that we have left may be entirely resting in your own hands and utterly dependent upon what you do today to prep for tomorrow. None of us can predict every disaster that might come our way or how much time that we have left. Anyone who professes to accurately predict these is, again, like I said earlier, probably trying to sell you on buying their solution. But still, we can be ready for many of these disasters and thereby extend what time we have left. It's about striking a balance between awareness and preparedness without allowing fear to dictate our lives. The time that we have left, it may be determined by the choices that we make today and the actions that we take to build a resilient future. And look, I'll finish by saying this. I encourage all of us to stay informed, prepare prudently, and take care of the present moment. Our focus on the future should be constructive and empowering rather than paralyzing. So what are your thoughts? Are we, as a community, seeing the events unfolding in the world from a too heavily biased perspective? Are we confirming our own biases, or are we implementing our own solutions? Will things continue to decline at a much more rapid pace, or is this simply another downward trough in humankind's existence? How much time do you think we have left? I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comments section below. As always, please stay safe out there.